Good afternoon. It's excuse me. Good afternoon. It's Thursday, the 31st of August, 2017, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson, and we're delighted to be back. And of course, there's been a lot happening while UK Column's been off the air for 2 weeks.
Has there?
Well, Princess Diana, I believe.
Well, I have to say, in France, every French television channel is just full of documentaries about Princess Diana at the moment. It is incredible.
So this is the most important news item.
Must be. Well, maybe we should just get on with it then and go straight to the second most important news item, which seems to be Brexit. Well, David Davis there a couple of days ago was giving opening remarks at the start of the next round of EU exit negotiations, as the government likes to call them. And he said, "I'm pleased to be back in Brussels for the third round of negotiations. We've had a busy few weeks since the last round of talks, and the UK government has published a large number of papers covering important issues related to our withdrawal." Were you aware of that?
No.
Was that in the news while I was away?
Not that I saw, Mike. No.
Okay. And our vision for the deep and special partnership we want with the European Union in the future. I thought we were leaving.
No.
No. Right. Okay. They are products of the hard work and detailed thinking that's been going on behind the scenes. So this was all fantastic. This was a couple of days ago. Everybody really happy, smiley, handshakes and all the rest of it, almost kissing, in fact. And then today, not serious. Brussels apparently flabbergasted as the UK team deconstructs the Brexit bill. This is not a legislative bill. This is the bill that Britain will receive in order to leave, which whatever number of tens of billions of pounds it happens to be at the moment. I picked the Express here, but all the mainstream newspapers were covering this. Just complete and utter nonsense, because apparently what David Davis did was that he sent in some junior Irk to describe how the bill being presented by the European Union for Britain to leave was completely ridiculous, and broke it down and said, this is why we're not paying this is not why we're not paying that. And as a result, Brussels is absolutely flabbergasted. This, of course, is all part of the pretense, the PR, that there's some kind of argument going on. So there you go. In the meantime, The Independent reporting that UK firms are to hire more staff in order to deal with new EU data protection rules. And
so these are the EU data protection laws that we've come out of as a result of Brexit,
No, because they're not even in existence yet. They don't come in till next year. So British businesses are hiring more staff in order to deal with data protection rules that don't come into next year because we're leaving the European Union.
Yeah.
Can you make sense of that, please?
It was a psyop. There is no Brexit, and obviously the more European laws that we stamp into British law, the better it is. There is no Brexit. There never was. It was a lie.
Right. Now, more serious stuff then. This is the Law Society Gazette. Now we've been talking about this for many, many years, Brian, the issue of the commercialisation, the corporatisation of government agencies, of local government, of the courts. And this really begins to sum it up, I think, because the headline here from the Law Society Gazette is Newcastle civic leaders in talks to host civil justice. And what they're saying is council leaders in Newcastle upon Tyne expect to relocate civil and family courts and tribunals to the city's civic centre in summer 2019. That's Newcastle City Council, they say, has confirmed that negotiations are in an advanced stage for a long-term lease of HM courts and tribunal service over the move. Bosses envisage the Haymarket location can bring in £32 million of income over the next 25 years and want the court service to be part of the development. And the leader of the council said, this partnership with our new long-term tenant not only secures a sustainable future for one of the iconic Grade 2 listed buildings in the city, but importantly, it helps us generate income that will fund vital frontline services for our residents. So what are we talking about here? We're talking about the council becoming a commercial organisation, now a commercial landlord. This is all part under the austerity, the notion of austerity, of bringing more and more agencies into one building. So we will now have the council in the civic centre, the the police, I suppose. So,
Well, that's already happened. Nottingham is one example. Plymouth is another one.
and now we're going to have the courts system, but not only that, we'll have some representation from Northumbria Police. The German consulate will be there, and the coroner's court will be there.
Yeah.
But basically, all this in the Civic Centre, which is the local council building, the main local council building. Here's what it looks like, just for the sake of interest. But this is all about commercial income for Newcastle City Council. Commercial income for Newcastle City Council. What has happened to governance in this country? It has been completely corporatised. Completely
corporatised, and what a dangerous mix that is, to have the police and the coroner. Well, the coroners have been recruited by local authorities for some time. Plymouth, many years ago, went for quite a long period without a coroner because they couldn't recruit one. But now we're bringing the police and the coroners into the civic centres, so no separation of powers. And of course, in Plymouth, we've had the extraordinary case of 2 death certificates for one lady with 2 death certificates. Coroner not interested, can't get near the coroner because of the police. And this now provides a layer of protection for local authorities, same local authorities that are hiring courts in order to process people who haven't paid their council tax.
So let me ask you this question then. If the Courts and Tribunal Service is now renting facilities from the council is taking people to court over council tax, or the council is taking children away from their parents in family courts, other civil court cases which might involve fines of some kind, there's now a commercial requirement for the court service to provide rent to the council. That's got to be a massive conflict of interest.
Well, absolutely. 1 or 2 people commenting in our chat box that this is a fascistic state emerging, and that's exactly what it is. And of course, no separation of the powers. Once you get involved with this system, how do you get free? How do you get justice if the court is being run by the local authority? The answer is you can't have justice. Well, let's see whether we can trust the BBC for truth. And of course, a little while ago, the BBC made a very big thing about its reality check team that were there to check what was true in information put out on the internet. If you watch the development of reality check over the last the last year or so, we can see that basically the remit is for this to rubber stamp any policy that the government is pushing through. So there's no checking the veracity of stories or checking the information. It's what can we push that helps the government? So this was their headline for today, and I picked up on the article on the left, which was talking about North Korea. This is the meat of the article: North Korean missiles, how long has Japan got to defend itself? And I've put in a headline there, pumping out the government line, be afraid. Basically, it says that if missiles were targeted at Japan, there'd only be 3 minutes warning for the population in Japan itself, and that's not long enough to get people to safety. Japan could use the, I have a frog with me today. Japan could use the American missile defense system Aegis or the Patriot missile systems, but these have got limitations in dealing with ballistic nuclear missiles. So the article suggests that Japan could invest in terminal high altitude area defense systems, but this hasn't been fully tested yet. And the Japanese have been debating getting advanced systems to destroy North Korean missiles, either on the point of launch or preemptively. But what you don't find in this article is there's no actual analysis of the actual threat from North Korea and why perhaps the North Koreans would fear Japan. If we go back and have a look at history, we can see, of course, that the Japanese have been particularly brutal with North Korea, but this is not a subject, or with Korea in general. This was pre the division of North and South Korea, but there's no analysis on why the Koreans should adopt some of the views of Japan that they do. So who's put this article together? Well, bring in this gentleman here, Chris Morris. This is obviously his Twitter page. He's claiming to give us the facts on North Korea, Japan and military matters. We simply ask where his experience in this field is, because for the last 5 years he's been the reporter in Brussels. So he's a Turkey, Middle East expert, so politics on the ground. Suddenly the BBC can use this man in order to analyse facts about military matters with the North Koreans. And I couldn't resist also having a look at this one, which he'd done, reality check. How much does the UK spend on overseas aid? This article begins by saying that the country should do really as Bill Gates suggests, which is that we should contribute a proportion of our GDP to aid, and if we don't, we're very naughty, nasty people. So first of all, BBC supports Bill Gates. Then we are saying we support the government view, which is that government aid, British government money, is building a safer, healthier, more prosperous world for people in developing countries and the UK. So that's all good, Mike. You can feel happy and comfortable with that. The BBC, of course, uses the government's own Department for International Development as the source for the overseas aid statistics. And we just say, well, of course, there's no analysis to determine if those DFID figures are accurate. And of course, DFID was giving money to BBC Media Action, which BBC Media Action was using to help subvert the Syrian government. So,
so this isn't a reality check at all.
This is just a
statement of government propaganda.
Yeah. It's a statement of British government policy, and we're going to have a little bit more on the BBC. But if anybody thinks the BBC is pushing out truth, we don't think so. Mike, you were keen to bring in Boris, and Boris, of course, has been boasting with Miss Patel, Priti Patel, that the British government is putting 200 million of aid to help Nigeria's fight against terror and famine. Now, this is all supposedly on the basis of terrorism by Boko Haram, which is acting amongst the Muslim community in the north of the country. So good British money coming in. This is all about helping little babies.
No, actually, if you read that headline correctly, what they're doing is pledging £200 million in order to help Nigeria's fight against terror and famine, because if the terror and famine don't exist, then Nigeria wouldn't have a fight, so they've got to help that fight. They've
got to help that fight. Well, we anticipated that comment. So behind the scenes, of course, what is also going on with that 200 million is the military are already in there. And here's Boris now on the other side. So we've got British aid combined with guns. And I think this one you've labelled quite correctly as what it really is, which is British soft power in action.
I like his purple tie.
Yes, the colour of kings. So he's there with an emerging leader's tie. Wonderfully posed picture here. She's in amongst the sandbags looking at the map with that authoritarian look, wondering which bit of the country to invade next, presumably.
Presumably, where to pump the next couple of 100 million. Okay, let's come back to the UK again. The Mirror here, the headline is Police Investigate 180 New Child Sex Cases in Grooming Capital of the UK as Fears Grow of Another Rochdale. And this is about the mill town of Keighley, which is in the Bradford area, West Yorkshire. And of course, people have been talking about this for quite some time. Nothing has been done. And suddenly, police are now investigating 200 cases of sexual exploitation, as the headline says, amid fears of another Rochdale. The 165 suspects, more than 100 victims, 12 men jailed last year for more than 140 years in total. And they give some examples. But of course, what the Mirror and the other mainstream media that were covering this issue failed to mention yet again is how this grooming activity is happening, why it is happening. The police's response here, too little, too late. And I'm not blaming police on the ground necessarily, because we don't know exactly what the situation is with regard to this investigation. But what we do know from the template, which seems to be running right across the country, is that senior police subverting too hard a word for this, subverting investigations by detectives on the ground.
Yeah, I don't think it's too hard.
No, and on top of that, none of these mainstream media coverage, none of the mainstream media coverage of Rochdale or any of the other so-called Asian child grooming investigations. Nobody is looking at who has permitted this activity to take place. And we come back to the earlier report on the issue of where courts, where councils, where the police are actually doing their day-to-day business. The breakdown, Brian, of separation of powers. And of course, the argument always has been that it's to avoid things falling through the cracks. But no, that's not actually what happens. When you put people together in this way, it makes the situation ripe for a cover-up.
Indeed, without any question.
Okay. Truck pontooning.
That's a very important issue.
Very important issue. Let's have a look at it. This is DAF Trucks, and they have a little video on YouTube talking about their challenge for 2025. They're saying that Europe is growing, that there are greater and greater traffic challenges, busier roads, of course, and so they've got to find a solution to this problem, and one solution to the problem apparently is truck pontooning, because cooperative automatic driving is the future, they say. It's more efficient, it's safer, it requires less road capacity, it consumes less fuel and reduces CO2 emissions. Good stuff. Of course, it seems to me that when you have, trucks of some kind connected together in some way, in fact, what you've got is a train, Brian.
Yeah, apparently they've been used to quite good effect historically.
Historically, yes, but apparently we don't want to do that. Instead, we want to pour billions
into a road train.
Into a road train, effectively, where the only person that's in control of the thing is the front driver, and every other driver behind can go to sleep. So whereas this requires less road capacity, of course, if they just put the freight onto the railways, that would require no road capacity at all.
Yeah.
And that would in fact be more efficient than even this. So anyway, this is how it's going to work. There's going to be a camera, there's going to be radar, and there's going to be a Wi-Fi connection between all these things. Apparently there's a little screen in the rearward trucks so that people behind can see what's ahead of the front truck. This has been talked about for quite some time. The Department for Transport back in 2014 commissioned a study on platooning. So why are we mentioning this? Well, apparently the government has now decided that they should have a go at this again. And they set up a consortium, including DAF Trucks, TNO, NXP, Ricardo, and they are going to create... They basically have an ambition for the UK to become a global leader in innovation. Right. So the fact that everybody else has been doing this for years is neither here nor there. Britain is going to become the global leader, and it's jointly funded. This new trial, jointly funded by Highways England and the Department for Transport. It's going to be overseen by Highways England, the Transport Research Laboratory. They're going to carry out these trials. This is Jim O'Sullivan on the screen, who's the Chief Executive of Highways England. So again, commercial. This is all commercial. Who said, "We're pleased to be supporting the government's ambition to be the UK's global leader for innovation. The trial has the potential to demonstrate how greater automation of vehicles, in this instance HGVs, can deliver improvements in safety, better journeys for road users, and reduction in vehicle emissions." And as I say, a whole bunch of commercial partners getting together in a sort of cartel to push this forward, including DHL, DAF Trucks, as we mentioned. So that's all good stuff. We're piling all this money into this when perhaps we might use the railways instead.
We might use the railways, but of course at the moment all of the motorways being dug up and reorganised, ready for road charging, which people seem just not to understand at the moment. The gantries, the speed cameras, and of course the number plate recognition cameras all lining up for road charging. Nobody realising what's coming very quickly.
Yeah.
So UK is going to lead in innovation, but we're also keen on a new world order. And we were interested to see in this article, we get a little glimpse as to what's coming. So here's the Express with a glowing headline: Royal Navy will carry out joint military drills with Japan amid the North Korean tension. So back into this tension, threat, angst with North Korea. But not to worry, because we are going to be working with the Japanese. We're going to be sending a ship, HMS Argyle. This vessel is a Type 23, the oldest of the class, and I think she was commissioned in about 1991 or something about there. So we're going to send the Japanese one ship. This is going to help counter North Korea and defend the world.
Good stuff.
And what's Theresa May got to say? Well, she says she's determined that our defence and security cooperation will continue to go from strength to strength, enhancing our collective response to threats to the international order and to global peace and security through increased cooperation on defence, cyber security and counter-terrorism. So in her mind, Mike, they're very clearly threats to the international order. And whose order might that be, we wonder?
Well, hers.
Hers and the other globalists. So there we are. That's what she's worried about. She's said that they'll be using HMS Argyle, but they can only just manage to send Argyle, and about 20 service personnel is the correct way of describing those extra men, because most of the Royal Navy, of course, has gone. But not to worry, we're sending that aged 23.
I can't let you move on without just querying the caption on that. New World Order, future leader, interim leader perhaps might be more appropriate.
Well, apparently she went over the holiday period. She went for a walk on the moors and decided that she would remain Prime Minister.
But hold on a second. The last time she did that, she called a general election and it ended in tears. Is that
well, she says, I went for a walk. I decided that I should stay Prime Minister, and so that's it. I'm going to be Prime Minister.
Right.
So well done, Theresa May. And let's have a look at what Boris has been up to. He's been commenting on the North Korea situation, and he doesn't like to deal with this bit of the information. So we're hearing about the threat, but this is what was reported from American sources in the Express. Late last night, North Korea launched several projectiles towards the Sea of Japan, which either failed in flight or exploded almost immediately. US Pacific Command from its Hawaii headquarters said the first and third missiles at 11:49 and 12:19 failed in flight. The second missile launch at 12:07 appears to have blown up immediately. So everybody's desperately worried about these North Korean missiles, but they're reporting, of course, that they're not working.
Indeed.
Well, Boris says he doesn't care because we've already labelled North Korea as a dangerous threat, and the aim is to overthrow their government. So, you know, Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Libya, Yemen, Iran will be next. He doesn't really care about the details that those naughty North Koreans don't seem to be able to build a missile system yet. And let's bring in this man because he says, relax. This is Mark Field, the Foreign Office Minister for Asia and Pacific. He says that we shouldn't be talking. A mix of sanctions and broad diplomacy at some point, one hopes, will be able to get people to the negotiating table. But we don't want to talk and de-escalate the situation now. We need to ramp up more fear in the public mind. Now, of course, I've added the second part there, but he's saying, no, we don't want to talk to those Koreans. We need to do a few other things first. So I've just suggested that it's, excuse me, to ramp up the fear. But this is the best bit. He's hailed the BBC's plan to air broadcast to North Korea from next month, saying it will help provide unbiased news from outside the rogue state. Isn't that wonderful?
That's fantastic.
We're going to use the BBC to provide unbiased news, and we just bring it on. He says the more people in North Korea realise that they're being told an absolutely false story by their government about what's going on beyond their borders. One hopes that there will be more discontent about the regime and that is the part of the purpose.
The common purpose.
The common purpose.
Yeah.
So we're going to use the BBC to stir up discontent, and that'll of course mean arrests and violence in North Korea. We don't want to talk to them. We want to foment discontent so that we can take the country over. And he said it'll be interesting to see the impact to be had in the months and years ahead.
Wow.
So I couldn't help remembering that BBC Media Action was used to do exactly the same in Syria. So we had BBC Media Action using Department for International Development charitable funds in order to help subvert a country, and they're doing the same here. So I think we'll just pop in this one, relax. The BBC is going to provide the world with truth.
Absolutely.
Yeah, well, Russia Today doesn't think this is the case. And in this article, they're pointing out that China is saying that they're not going to allow war or chaos on their doorstep. And the key bit in the article is that a lady from the Chinese Foreign Ministry is saying here of the Western powers, they are the loudest when it comes to sanctions, but nowhere to be found when it comes to making efforts to promote peace talks. They want nothing to do with responsibility. And that's what she had to say on Wednesday, and that seems pretty true to me.
Yeah. Okay. Tropical Storm Harvey, Hurricane Harvey, whatever it is. As of yesterday, of course, it was moving northeastward from the Mississippi River Valley into the Tennessee River Valley, and then into Kentucky, weakening all the time. But in Texas, rivers still rising, particularly in eastern Texas, and the river's not expecting to reach their heights until later in the week, today and tomorrow. Rivers breached in many points, as we know. Well, let's have a look at the response, the typical response from a very nice man, Jeffrey D. Sachs. He said, now the climate-denying, tax-cutting, anti-government Texas governor wants a federal bailout of more than $125 billion, typical and predictable. So this is all about climate change. Has done this, Brian, and anybody that says otherwise is a climate denier. Anybody that maybe wants some federal funding to help solve the problem is no more than a climate-denying, tax-cutting, anti-governmentalist, it seems. Yeah. So this is typical of the response.
Excuse me.
But of course, there have been indications that this type of thing was coming for quite some time. This type of event, the effect on humans, that is. So this is from Al Jazeera a year ago. Investigating Katrina is the headline. Lessons learned from the storm, and what they absolutely, looking back on this a year later, what they absolutely demonstrate, of course, is that no lessons were learned from Katrina at all. They say that over a decade after the historic storm, they investigate what went wrong and plans for the future, for future prevention and control. They say in 2005, Hurricane Katrina claimed 1,800 lives, leaving 80% of New Orleans devastated underwater. Only one line of defense, the levee, failed the city. Since the disastrous storm hit, there have been concerted efforts to reduce risks from another possible Katrina. Well, have there? So let's look at this article, also from 2016 in the Houston Chronicle, because the key point here is that Hurricane Katrina, as we mentioned, killed 1,800 people. $130 billion was the economic losses. And so the question is, how much money would it have cost to prevent those $130 billion in the first place? Superstorm Sandy in New York, that killed 100 people, caused $65 billion in economic losses. But the plans for sea gates to protect New York Harbor were going to cost $9 billion, but that was too much money to spend. So $65 billion was the ultimate cost of that. And this article here from the Houston Chronicle, the headline is, again from 2016, the headline is "Subdivision Never Flooded Until It Did, and Residents Want Answers." And they say the plan of the Harris County Flood Control Authority for a new flood control infrastructure to harden the Houston area against its repeated flooding was estimated to be around, it says in this article, around $26 billion to solve that problem. And the head of Harris County Flood Control District, Mike Talbot, in 2016 said that the problems in some areas reflect engineering strategies made decades. Again, the point is that the infrastructure was not developed over many decades. And he said that the current flood control system was not designed to handle infrequent monster storms. He said the consequence of not building excess capacity, especially as growth intensified, the consequences could be seen. He said a lot of engineering was done before people understood the risks. And of course, the other point that he made was that people were building properties close to floodways. And this is the same as has been going on in the
this
UK
country as well,
with people building properties on floodplains as well. So $26 billion would have been what was required to spend in order to solve this problem, or at least to help mitigate the effects on human activity. That money wasn't spent, and now the governor needs $130 billion. But this has got nothing to do with climate change, Britain. Brian, it's got everything to do with the fact that the investments weren't made and infrastructure has been allowed to crumble.
But don't dare complain, because if you complain, you're anti-government.
And a climate change denier.
Denier.
Yes.
Okay, well, the good news is that the banners are out for jabs, and thank you very much to the person who sent in this little photograph. What the banner says is, book your flu jab now.
Excellent.
So a nice little flag there appearing by the side of the road, and we're now entering the season of get a flu jab at all costs. But of course, the one thing the government doesn't want to talk about is the dangers of vaccinations. And we will have more to report on that in due course, including, of course, the mother who won her case that she is not required to vaccinate her children. But GPs being paid bonuses, very effective bonuses for giving flu jabs. And of course, the posters and the banners now coming out as we approach the autumn flu season.
Yes.
Yes. Okay, that brings us to the end of today's UK Column News. We will be back at 1 o'clock tomorrow with Northern Exposure with David Scott. So please join us then. Thank you. Bye-bye.